Hello, welcome to the Media Duplication class. This class will introduce you to media duplication, the general processes and procedures that are used, and not only what is used, but why they are used, and why we do what we do with media duplication. Why do we duplicate? Duplication is the most important aspect of computer forensics. We do it to preserve the court's evidence, conduct digital evidence analysis, and to provide legal discovery. The first aspect of digital evidence the defense should and usually will question is the duplication of evidence and how it is handled afterwards. This is when it comes down to you and the evidence. They are attacking you. They are attacking your procedures. They will attack your processes. That's why it's very important that everything that is done is followed by a reason or a procedure and is documented. The chain of custody is important here, so make sure that it is maintained. Normally you should have a form that you use on all the cases that is a consistent chain of custody. Who handled it, when, where, and who was it transferred to or back to. Like the graphic implies, you do not want to screw up the duplication. You do not want to give the defense any inroads into anything that they could use to confuse a jury or confuse a judge. Duplication environment. You need to make sure that the environment that the evidence is kept is controlled. You need to make sure that the device or computer used for the duplication is controlled. You want to avoid the possibility of any contamination. You do not know the true heritage of the media, so consider it very fragile. And what I mean by these points are, such as, make sure the device or computer used for duplication is controlled. Make sure that the computer you're using for that has up-to-date virus protection. And that the virus protection doesn't interfere with the data that you are trying to duplicate. You want to avoid the possibility of any contamination. That comes back to your system and the hard drives and the media you use to make the image or to make the duplication. Ensure before using it that it is free of contamination and contaminants. And remember, you never do know the true heritage of media, so consider it fragile and consider your machine fragile. You could end up duplicating a hard drive that is raked with malware and viruses that could then infect your machine or your examination system or those of others. In thinking about the prior slide about the duplication environment, just remember the O.J. Simpson trial, how a simple murder investigation turned into one of the largest and most publicized cases in the world. Everything was scrutinized. If you stop and think about it, that case did not have a single piece of evidence that showed the individual was innocent. All of it showed that he was guilty. And all they did was attack the environment, the evidence and its environment. That same thing is going to happen to you. That is why the prior slide was so important. So now let's go on and start talking about some definitions. Duplication. Duplication is a process of replicating the digital data, ones and zeros. We refer to these ones and zeros as data objects. Duplicate copy. A duplicate copy is an exact bit-for-bit, sector-by-sector replication of all user-accessible data objects from the suspect's media onto another digital media device in the same relative locations and structure. A duplicate image is an exact bit-for-bit, sector-by-sector replication of all user-accessible data objects from the source media and placed into a logical file that can be used to virtually represent the original media's contents, and from which the original media's contents can be recreated if so desired. What that means is I should be able to take an image file, and use it to recreate a duplicate copy
of the original media on a similar hard drive. Duplicate image. Today, more images are being created from live running systems. Business systems cannot always be taken down to image. Encryption is another reason to image a live running system. In these cases, it's not a static image, but a dynamic image of the data at the time of duplication. Duplicate copy. The pros, it's the fastest way to make a copy. You're going from disk to disk. In fact, the only limiting factor, speed-wise, of copying from disk to disk is the hard drive that is the slowest to write. It can be used by any platform, and it's easy to explain. Visually, it's easy to show a jury how you literally take ones and zeros off of one platter and put them onto the other one directly. The cons, it's hard to share easily. When you're talking about a terabyte drive, you have to make multiple copies of terabyte drives, and that takes time. And it's hard to, you have to always ship them, and it's not something you can transfer over the internet or wirelessly. A drive is required for each copy. So when you're making a duplicate copy, normal process would be to make 2 copies, one for emergency and one that you can work on. Duplicate image. Well, the pros, you can share over a network. I can transfer via the internet or through a network all the image files without a problem. They can be stored on almost any logical media. That includes CDs, DVDs, RAID drives, hard drives, tapes. The other thing is that it's hard to change an image without knowledge. Because the MD5 hash is taken when an image is made, any changes to that image or those image files would result in an MD5 hash not being the same. So changing the evidence from that aspect is very, very hard. The cons, it takes longer to create. You can copy from a drive to drive in somewhat quick fashion. One terabyte drive, about 3 hours. And if you use a very fast hard drive, you can always get that down to less than an hour sometimes. But it is harder to explain what a duplicate image is. And it requires specific platforms to read it. If you're going to read a EO1 file, you need guidance software to read that. Or something that will mount an EO1 file. Or mount a DD file. So it will come back to specific platforms, sometimes to read specific file types. Here's just a quick list of duplication software and hardware that's available, such as to copy, Linux DD, SafeBack, ByteBack, ProDiscover, Disk Copy from Mikey Technology, a Logic Cube, or an ICS. To make an image or to make image files, you have Linux DD again, Incase, WinAcquire, SafeBack, Snapback, iLook, FTK. The list is long. All that matters is that whatever software or hardware you use, that you personally test it and test it consistently at time intervals to make sure that the new versions work properly and that it is properly making either a copy or an image file properly. Duplicate copy. This is a duplication of a drive from the suspect's drive, the source drive, to a forensics drive, the destination drive. The destination drive has to be larger or as large as the source drive. An example, the source drive is 300 gigabytes, then the destination drive has to be at least 300 gigabytes, if not more, just to ensure that the entire drive is copied across. Duplicate copy. This is the duplication of a drive from the suspect drive, the source drive, to a forensics drive, the destination drive. The destination drive has to be larger or as large as the source. The duplication can be either done on a non-dedicated or dedicated PC. Drive-to-drive duplication is the most reliable and fastest method, period. The speed is only limited by the slowest drive involved. Dedicated versus non-dedicated. Non-dedicated is a PC running duplication software. The cons of this, though, are you have to make sure that that PC is clean of any contaminants and that the software that you are using absolutely does make a duplication, and that there's been no changes due to the contaminants, malware, or viruses. Whereas a dedicated is the device just for duplication. And those devices are normally sent ready to go. There are no contaminants, and there's no possibility of contaminating one of those units by even using it. Whereas on a non-dedicated PC, that can happen. Non-dedicated. You can boot from a DOS boot USB disk or boot from a CD DVD. Even one with Linux would work. You can run from Windows. Always use hardware media protection, a write protect. Best to use separate boot drive than a forensic drive. One of the common practices today are people are creating a bootable USB disk that is write protected that will boot into the Windows operating system and then run a program such as WinAcquire or FTK to acquire the data from a evidence device. Non-dedicated. You run software that will copy the drive to another drive. A variety of ports can be used. Different types of drives can be duplicated, including IDE, SATA, SCSI, SAS, flash drives. You can use a USB and or FireWire gateway device to adapt to an IDE, SCSI, or flash media. This is one of the easiest ways to duplicate media, especially when it comes to a variety or different types of media. In strange environments, you can duplicate through slower ports or channels, such as the parallel port, the USB port, serial port, an Ethernet connection, an infrared port, or a wireless connection. An example would be the modern-day servers. Most do not have any ports on them except for the Ethernet connection, and it is usually multiple Ethernet connections in the rear. You could, off one of those free Ethernet connections, attach a network-attached storage device, and then running your duplication software, make the image files go to that network-attached storage device. Dedicated items. Special purpose devices for duplicating specific media, usually IDE drives. Always use hardware media protection. Make sure the device has no way to write to a source drive. These can be very fast and easy to use. Make sure it is designed for forensics. There's a multitude of items out there that are designed to copy drives, but they are not designed for the forensic market, which basically means that the one port that you're hooking up your evidence drive to make a copy of may not be write protected and thus be contaminated. Dedicated devices are simply to use. Very little training required to use a properly designed device. They're fast, they operate at the highest speed of the slowest drive. They're normally small and compact, and they are extremely reliable. Duplicate image. This is the duplication of a drive from the suspect's drive, the source drive, to a destination drive, saving it as a logical file, the image file. The destination drive has to be large enough to hold the image or the image files that are created. Today, this is the primary way in which most forensic investigators make images. They're easy to handle after the fact. They can be stored on almost any media, and they are easily transferred via the internet to other locations. An image file can be segmented into smaller files so they will fit on multiple smaller media, such as CDs or DVDs. Each file would have a file name showing the order in which the file was created. An example, casefile.e01, casefile.e02, etc. Image files have specific formats. Some are proprietary, and some are open source. All require software that would interpret the file to virtually represent the media. It is like how Microsoft Word can read a Word document, but it cannot read a VisiCalc spreadsheet file.
Incase can read an incase file, but not a DLO image file. Most software can read a DD file. Some of the caveats about duplication. Controlling the boot process in the field when you're using a bootable CD or USB device. Sometimes the BIOS in a laptop or a computer system does not allow us to change the boot order, and this can put a real halt on a duplication. Duplicating laptop drives. Some are easily pulled out of the machine, others you have to do within the machine using a boot drive because the hard drive is literally soldered on to the motherboard of the laptop and cannot be removed. And then you have the caveats of two drives hooked together as a RAID within a laptop, one an SSD, the other one a physical rotating hard drive, but they look and seem as one. Once again, you would have to boot to the laptop, run into legacy mode in the BIOS for the laptop, and then make the duplicate copy. LBA mode versus HCS mode. This is logical block addressing compared to head, cylinder, and sector mode. Both have their pluses and minuses. LBA is more reliable, whereas head, sector, and cylinder is not as reliable for duplicating later. Striped drives and RAID arrays. You have to know the order in which the drives were made. Were they drives 0, 1, 2, and like they would be in a RAID 5? You would have to know what type of RAID it is. Is it a RAID 5, a RAID 7, a RAID 0, which is a mirror of each other. You would also have to know if this is a software RAID or it could be a hardware RAID, like Hewlett-Packard RAID controllers. The actual software to make the RAID is on the controller itself. Now you have to get that RAID controller or that entire system and make the duplicate off it. Network servers. You never know where the server actually is. It's like the cloud. Where is that server physically located, or am I just pulling an image via the network? Solid state drives. Totally different interfaces, different speeds, really dependent upon the drivers to be able to read that solid state drives. Cameras and personal information systems. Cameras can have internal memory, such as RAM that you need to duplicate, as well as a hard drive that you need to duplicate. Printers are another example of that. Some printers actually keep copies on a hard drive that is attached to the printer itself, whereas others, it's actually on a ROM chip within the printer. Some other caveats. A test track. Hard drives do have areas beyond the user accessible areas that sometimes are referred to as test tracks. A drive BIOS, the jumpers. A Maxter 2 gigabyte drive is a good example of that. The actual jumpers on the hard drive itself determine what the drive is looking like. And you may have to change those jumpers on the drive for it to speak correctly to your duplicating software. Bad sectors on source drive or destination drive. When you're making an exact physical copy of a drive and it cannot read the sector, what does your software do? Does it make it all zeros? Or does it produce onto the image the minimal data it was able to acquire from that bad sector? Those are things that you need to know for court. Drive tied to a motherboard. A good example of that is some Hewlett-Packard and some Lenovo drives that are physically tied not only to the laptop itself, the motherboard, but they're logically tied to it. If you remove the hard drive from that motherboard, that hard drive ceases to operate and you cannot read it. Storage integrity over time. Some of these cases may last 7 to 10 years, where the storage device that you're using, that hard drive, or that tape, lasts 7 to 10 years. Cost and duplication time. What does it really cost when you're doing a duplication? The operator has to stand there and wait until it's finished. This could be an hour, or it could be 4 days. Hardware write blocking during duplication. Absolutely something you try to do if you can. You cannot always do it. There will be a minority of cases in which the hardware write blocking you simply cannot perform. but if it is available, you should use it. And host-specific features, such as HPA or hard disk drive lock, which is a password for the hard drive. You will have to get special equipment to remove both of those so that you could even look at the drive to make a duplication of it. An example of some software that does that would be a TOLA drive repair station or a PC3000 hard drive repair station. As I said in the beginning of this course, the most important task in computer forensics is the duplication. This is where your reputation, the court's evidence, and the ability to correctly analyze the evidence can all be compromised permanently. This is also the first area a defense attorney will attack. Failure here is absolutely not an option. This ends this lecture on media duplication. Now let's go on to our next lecture.